What is going on, YouTube? Bryce Builds It All, your favorite A&P. I am Part 147 instructor, back with another video. And this time around, I'm going to be giving y'all some of my tips on how to write better aircraft logbook entries. And I'm probably also going to mention FAA Form 337s. So, stick around. So the first thing we need to understand about writing logbook entries is that the FAA does give some guidance in FAR Part 43. Now, some people argue and say that it's 14 CFR 43, but it doesn't matter. Federal Aviation Regulation 43 is all about maintenance, preventative maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. And I'm actually going to put up a picture of the exact regulation when it comes to the writing of records and the things that are required. Now, there are certain things obviously required is going to be the date of the work performed, the name and or signature of the person performing the work, their certificate number, the type of certificate held, and then, you know, a lot of times people will put the TAC time, and sometimes people will put the aircraft information, although the aircraft information isn't required. But here's the thing about the date, right? Or not the date. Here's the thing about the person performing the work and their certificate held. I used to sign off my logbook entries by writing my name out. I would actually put my name, Bryce, last name, and then I would sign it right below it and put my number. Until an FAA inspector asked me one day, he goes, "Why are you writing your name twice?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, you have to sign your name." He goes, "Is your signature not your name?" I said, "Well, of course my signature is my name." And he goes, "So then why are you writing your name twice?" So you don't have to print out your name and then sign it. You can just sign it and then put your type of certificate. If it's a private pilot, it would be PP. If it's an A&P like me, it would be A&P. And a lot of people think that you put A&P IA. If you're an IA, you don't. You actually just put A&P if you're just performing the duties of an A&P. You only write IA if you're performing the duties of an IA, which would be signing off a major repair or alteration and or signing off a annual inspection. So there's that. But those are the things that are required, and it also says a description of the work performed. And that's all the guidance the FAA gives. They just say a description of the work performed. They don't give you a lot more guidance on what that description of work should be. And one of the things that I see a lot from my students is they'll either try to go too in-depth or not in-depth enough, and it's usually not nowhere in between. So in the field, in the real world, in the wild, as I like to say, I have seen a person write up a logbook entry as changed tire. Okay, which one? The nose tire, the left main, the right main? You put a tire on your car? So there is certain information you want to have. And my general rule of thumb is, at a minimum, I want to know what you did and where you did it at. So if you're going to say that you changed a tire, you should say changed left main tire. If that's all you want to write in your logbook entry, I reckon that's a legal logbook entry by the regs, but that's not how I would do it. How I would do it is what steps I took, what parts I used, and what approved data I did to perform that repair. So even something as simple as a tire, it would say something along the lines of jacked aircraft in accordance with Aircraft Maintenance Manual Section 2 or Chapter 2, right? And then it would say removed left main wheel assembly in accordance with Chapter, I'll say 6, whatever chapter is landing gear, okay? Every manual is going to be different. Disassembled wheel in accordance with Chapter 6. Installed new, and I'm going to give the part number, manufacturer, and serial number of the tire and the tube if it has an inner tube. I'm going to give both of those things. I'm going to say that I reassembled the wheel and I torqued it too, and I'm going to give the number that I torqued the wheel halves to and what data I did that in accordance with, because you might find that that's a different manual than the aircraft manual. It might be a Cleveland Wheels and Brakes manual that you're torquing the wheel assembly back to, but you're installing the wheel on the aircraft in accordance with the aircraft manual. So it would say, removed wheel in accordance with aircraft manual, disassembled wheel, installed new tube and new tire part number, whatever, reassembled wheel and torqued wheel half assemblies to 90 inch-pounds in accordance with Cleveland Aircraft or Wheels and Brakes manual. And I'd give the Wheels and Brakes manual, number and revision number and date and all of that information. And then I would say that I serviced the tire with however many PSI in accordance with Aircraft Chapter 2 and took aircraft off of jacks. And follow all of that with, and this is the most crucial part of your logbook entry, this aircraft is returned to service for the work performed. And that's all I'm going to say. Now, you don't have to say that. You don't have to, because the regulation says that the signature constitutes the return to service. So if you don't put that, if all you do is sign it, the regulation says that you signing it is returning the aircraft to service. Fun caveat on that. If you sign it, you're also saying that it's what you did is returned to service. So if you run into a situation where I torque that wheel back together and it's just covered in corrosion, or maybe the bearing is halfway falling out of it, like the race is just chewed up, right? And I'm like, that wheel is not airworthy. That wheel is bad. And I tell the owner, hey man, this wheel is unairworthy. And the owner's like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. Put it back together and I'll catch it at the annual. I'm like, no. It's not safe. If you write up that logbook entry the way I talked about, and you're like, well, I'm not going to return it to service because I don't think it's safe. But you write all you do is sign it. You don't write that statement, you're still returning it to service saying that it was safe. So it might be wise, if you run into a situation like that, to actually write in there that inspected wheel assembly and found bearing races unserviceable, or found bearing races in unairworthy condition, and then sign it. Because you're saying right there that, hey, I found this was unairworthy. If the pilot wants to fly it after that, that's on the pilot. You have to do a logbook entry for the work you did, but you don't have to certify that that wheel is safe. And that's where a lot of people get confused. Now, a lot of people will claim to be a lawyer, or will claim to say that they know the regs, and they will argue the regs with you all day. But at the end of the day, it's not about arguing the regulations. It's not about even arguing with a FAA inspector. It is about what you can prove in a court of law when you get sued after an aircraft has crashed. You're going to be sitting there on the stand in front of a lawyer, and obviously I'm exaggerating, and you're going to have to explain that I did all of these things in accordance with the manual. And they're going to say, what do you have to prove that? Well, my logbook entry says that I changed the tire, so I did it. And then it's your word. It's your word against everybody else's. But if your logbook entry is thorough and has the tools you used, especially like if you're using a torque wrench that's calibrated, you should write that I torqued it in accordance with the manual using calibrated torque wrench. And the torque wrench should have a serial number on it and what the expiration date of that torque wrench was. There's no doubt that what I did, the work that I performed, was airworthy. Or the work that I performed was safe, I should say. Which will lead me to my next tip. With that return to service, it's very important that you don't use the word airworthy unless you're signing off a 100-hour or an annual inspection. When you start throwing around the word airworthy, you're saying that the aircraft is airworthy. So really, you only ever want to say the aircraft is returned to service for the work performed, or the engine is returned to service, or the propeller is returned to service, unless you are doing a 100-hour inspection. Then you would say that you inspected the aircraft in accordance with a 100-hour inspection, and it was found to be airworthy, or it was found to be unairworthy, and is hereby returned to service, and then you sign it, right? But when you say, did all this work to the main wheel, changed tire, this aircraft is airworthy, and then you sign it off, you just said the whole aircraft was airworthy, and all you worked on was the tire. So watch that language very carefully, but again, that is clearly stated in the regulations, and I'll show both that regulation for returning an aircraft to service after maintenance and returning an aircraft to service after an inspection, and how those are different. Now, when it comes time to signing off a 337, oftentimes what I'll see my students do and other mechanics do is they will treat a Form 337 for a major repair or alteration as if it was a logbook entry, which you don't need to do. And I can do a deep dive on this, so please drop in the comments below if you want me to do a deep dive on how to fill out a 337. I've gotten 1 or 2 requests for it, so it's something I might just go ahead and do anyways, because I don't think it's that hard. But for the description of work on a 337, I don't care that you pulled off the wheel pants. I don't care that you jacked up the airplane. I don't care that you painted or lubricated the bearings. None of that matters. What matters with a 337 is, more importantly, the approved data you are using to make the modification, and the parts or therein that you are using to make the modification. So, for example, if I was changing from an old style wheel, like a Goodyear wheel, and I was putting a Cleveland wheel on it, and Goodyear still makes wheels, but some of the old early like 50s and 60s aircraft use Goodyear wheels that are no longer in production. So when you change them, you'll often go back with a Cleveland wheel, which will come with a 337 and an STC. but that's important. If it's coming with approved data like an STC, the STC should have instructions for continued airworthiness. It should have a parts list. It should have installation instructions and all those things. And your 337 should be written up with that. It should say installed Cleveland wheel assemblies in accordance with, give the STC number, and then all of the manual's numbers as well. So not just the installation instructions. What was the revision date on those installation instructions? What was the manual number or document number on those installation instructions? Because that STC holder may have multiple STCs, and you want to pinpoint exactly which installation manual you used for your aircraft. Same thing if there's any ICAs or instructions for continued airworthiness. You want to make sure that you said inserted ICAs and give the document number and revision number on those ICAs into the maintenance record. So that's really your biggest difference between a 337 and a logbook entry, is a 337 is not going to be near as in depth on the what steps you took. It's going to be in depth on what was the approved data you used. If it's just a major repair and you had to seek engineering approval from a DER, a designated engineering representative, they will give you a whole bunch of things to write in your 337 that, you know, they engineered this patch, their numbers, their approvals, and all that good stuff as well. So I hope you found this beneficial. Now that we're kind of towards the end, I wanted to add that this whole video, and I might paste this in at the beginning, this whole video is not a how to write a logbook entry. This is some tips and tricks that I used. It's aimed at Part 147 students. It's aimed at, you know, pilots that are writing logbook entries, whoever might be writing a logbook entry, but it's not a how-to. If you want me to do a full how-to video on a logbook entry, I'm happy to do a full deep dive into that. It's something that I obviously do a lot of as an IA. But as always, if you found this video interesting, leave us a like, leave us a comment, consider subscribing, and as always, go build something and be easy.